Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I'm trying to get a word in edgeways here. Good morning. What a fantastic turnout, and no wonder in view of the panel. I want to apologize to the people here, Mr. Gill and others, that I have my back to you, Enid, this morning, because I have to face the C-SPAN camera on pain of death to introduce the guests. And instead of the usual anarchy which prevails when I introduce them, today we have alphabetical order as a kind of tribute to the subject of today, which is the word. And so I begin with Roy Blunt. You say it, Blunt. Where is he? Here he is. I've got to face this way, Roy. Sorry. Which plunges us all into the soup straight away. He's the Roy of all trades, linguistic expertise with the rest of the panel. He's a usage consultant of the American Heritage Dictionary, but is the only one who's rafted the Amazon and been attacked by a piranha fish, unless I'm surprised by my colleagues. William Buckley behind me, founder of the National Review, holder of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, has just published The Right Word, which we celebrate today. It's only his 37th book. He's the lexicographical snob. Where is he? And, yes, it's him. And wait for this, he's very heuristic. An adjective which we also use as a noun, and say that Buckley is an heuristic. And if you don't know what that means, you've come to the right breakfast. An Olympian leap in the alphabet takes us to Abe Rosenthal, columnist, foreign correspondent, Pulitzer Prize winner who ran the New York Times for more than 15 enlightened years. He was the daily drill sergeant of a Chinese army of words, and my, did he get them on parade on time. Sapphire, poet, performance poet and novelist who has taught reading and writing to teenagers and adults in Harlem for 8 years. Her novel, Push, is really poignant and funny. It's a stunning evocation of the voice of a black street girl of 16. I'll give you a kind of, I can't do the words, but let me just give people the flavor of the prose. Boys say I'm laughing ugly. He say Clarice is so ugly, she laughing ugly. His friends say, no, that fat bitch is crying ugly. Laugh, laugh. And it's an absolutely fantastically funny and moving book. And Jesse Scheidler, the gatekeeper. No word or usage gets into the Random House Dictionary without a Scheidler good housekeeping stamp of approval. He is also, may I unmask him, this is the author of the book The F Word. He wouldn't think it. And finally, in the Sweeney Todd chair, the last chair here, is Stephen Sondheim, the celebrated Pulitzer Prize winner, lyricist and composer, Passion, Sunday in the Park with George, West Side Story, and many other brilliant achievements. So let me begin with the renegade, the lexicographical snob, the man who invites more rage for his use of the obscure. Buckley, why should you want to rescue a survivor from some Greek linguistic shipwreck like heuristic? Defend yourself, Buckley.
Well, give me a synonym for it, and
I'll give you a synonym for it.
And I'll start using it.
Okay, controversial.
That doesn't mean the same thing.
Nagging.
No, sorry.
Come on, you give me. Tell everybody what it means in your defense.
An heuristic legal defense is one that takes advantage of all the loopholes and is very long drawn out. So I don't know another word that quite does that. But if you want to, I received this letter from Ken Galbraith yesterday, and this might help you out a little bit. He says, I take it from your letter that I should close down on endorsements for a while. I had thought of giving you one for your recent book. It would have been, everybody knows that William Buckley is a master of words. It is only the use to which he puts them that restrains one's enthusiasm.
But defend it. Let's come. You really rejoice in using words that nobody else understands.
No.
Yes.
No.
Well,
That's like saying Thelonious Monk rejoiced in playing a 11th chord with a raised ninth. He just thought it was the right chord to play at that moment in the music.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, how am I doing?
Beethoven.
It's not really a chord.
Roy, what do you think of this undemocratic champion on your...
Well, I was reading in Mr. Buckley's book about his justification of using the word anfractuous.
Say that again.
Anfractuous instead of ambiguous, which, and on grounds partly of onomatopoeia, which I think is a welcome acknowledgement.
Can you not hear?
He justified using the word anfractuous partly on the basis of onomatopoeia, that it sounded more like ambiguous than ambiguous itself did. And I think that's a welcome acknowledgement of the role of the ear in language. I was struck by how oral President Clinton's speech was yesterday. There was nothing that really leapt out. I mean, there was a couple of lines in the poem, Miller Williams' poem, which I may not remember them quite right, but I do remember them. I think I do. Who has seen learning struggle from teacher to child cannot allow ignorance to spread like rot, which has a nice ring to it, I think. At least the word rot has a nice ring to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that more and more speakers today and writers neglect the ring and thump of words and just sort of get awfully abstract. That's certainly not true of the case of anybody sitting here, especially Sapphire, a novel I've been reading. But
well, most language is spoken rather than written, which brings me to Steve Sondheim. How do you respond to that? I mean, do you think the spoken word is more important than the written word?
It's not a question of importance. It's fun. It's
Hello?
Hello.
We're having trouble here with the microphones, Mr. Soundmaster. Okay.
How's this? Okay. No. I said the fun of the language, it seems to me, is the sound of it. And I know when I read, I hear a voice speaking the language. And it's very interesting what Roy says about words like rot. I think, you know, the core of the language are all the Anglo-Saxon roots, as opposed to the fancy words which are for decoration, for icing, like anfractuous and heuristic and that sort of thing. Which I think that's spice, because you want dessert as well as.
Bill Buckley's dessert. Yeah. Okay. Go on.
But it's I don't know if Bill uses heuristic in when he's talking.
When you do, Bill, when you're talking.
Oh, sure. I talk that way with my dogs.
My God.
That explains it.
Hey, I'm going to come back to language and sound. Let me stay for a second, if you don't mind, on this use of the word that nobody else has heard of and sends them scurrying into the dictionary. Do you think it's a kind of anti-democratic thing, or is he saving words that might disappear?
In this case, I don't worry too much about democracy, but I must say that although I am about the 14th or 15th most fervent admirer of Mr. Buckley in the American press, sometimes goes up one notch, sometimes goes down four, but generally that's... when it comes to these lovely-looking, strange... When it comes to so-called difficult or long or unusual words, I feel something like a character played by Audrey Hepburn in one of her movies, when Cary Grant or Peck or whoever it was went up to put the move on her, and she looked at him and said, I'm very sorry. I have so many friends now that I have no room for more until somebody dies. I now feel that I have I know quite a lot of words already.
How many do you think you know altogether?
In one way or another, more than Buckley.
How many?
But I don't. I'm full up with words, and like McGovern, I'm much more interested in how they're used, and which he is an expert, of course, and I'm much more interested in other aspects, many other aspects of writing, and even speaking and communicating to use a word I never either say or write than I am in acquiring more words.
Well, the trouble is, you know, that means you would be a kind of rejecting new words all the time, and you must be discarding old ones at quite a rate.
No, I don't reject new ones. I sometimes make them up, which I feel, you know, I use words as verbs instead of nouns or vice versa, and I'm not against them. I just say that and I'm fairly serious about this, that as a sometime writer, it's not what attracts me either to reading or writing, and certainly not in Bill's books. What attracts me to Bill's books are his brains rather than the words he plays with, enjoys.
What do you feel, Sapphire, about these strange, outlandish...
About the words? I don't know. I think what I think is, going back to the Thelonious Monk, why would, you know, one person try to confine another person's use of words? I mean, they're not the words I use or particularly need, but that's like saying Aretha Franklin should only sing in the range I can sing. People use the extent of language that they need for themselves, and that hopefully, you know, there'll be other people who can use it too. It's not the language I need, but then it's the language somebody needs.
But most of us can listen to Aretha Franklin and get it. But if the people you were teaching in Harlem had to read something by Bill Buckley, they wouldn't get it.
Well, that would be something to strive for. Again, I mean, you don't want to create this little 1-inch strata, you know, where people don't strive to use other kinds of language.
We're going to come back to ebonics and all that shortly. Jesse?
Bill Buckley is not writing for people in Harlem. You know, his audience is very different from that. And I was reading recently Robert Birchfield, who's the former editor-in-chief of the Oxford English Dictionary, noting that he was asked, why is it that Anita Bruckner uses these words like rebarbative and nugatory, uses these hard words? And his answer was, well, maybe she doesn't think they're hard, which is a great response. And
here we are.
Yeah. I personally, I like the fact that you use words like anfractuosity and all that. I never see them. You know, it's great to be able...
Do you know the meaning of the word usufruct?
The right to enjoy property that someone else,
Thank you very
based
much.
on usage.
I was keeping...
Henry George.
Very good. I was keeping that back for the finale, but I couldn't wait.
Can I just have to mention this word I saw yesterday. I think it's in the Sunday Times. A new word, which was new to me at any rate. It's not in the Random House Dictionary. It was a feminist letter to the editor complaining that the reviewer of a new translation of the Odyssey had not remarked upon how lingo-romantic the Odyssey was. And I was fascinated by that word because at first I thought it had something to do with a love affair with the language or something, and then I thought it might even have to do with French kissing. But then it occurred to me that lingo probably came from lingam, which is Sanskrit for the male organ, which I assume is true. So I don't know whether we'll be seeing lingo romance around, but I want to be the first person to bring it up at breakfast. I also have a better term, a shorter term for it. Would be, for lingo romance, would be phallic froth.
Phallic froth, okay. Sounds very close to something else. Stephen, the sound, there's another example of the sound. When you're composing a lyric, do you stride about the room uttering the sounds rather than looking at the printed page?
It depends. It depends on the character. The whole thing is to get the words that that character would use as opposed to the words I would like to use. It's a lot of fun to play around with fancy words, but most characters and most of the shows I've written wouldn't use that kind of language. So generally, I don't speak the lyrics. I sing them because lyrics don't exist without music.
And when your works are translated, what happens to the careful?
I don't know enough about foreign languages, but I know that a lot of my stuff is not translated because it's very verbal. The shows that get translated are ones that are less verbal, and because playfulness with language is something I enjoy a lot in song, and so I don't know enough about them. I rely on other people to tell me whether the translations are any good or not. If the thrust of the song is in.
Most of us are obviously obsessed by words not in the begging your presence so much in the scholarly sense as in the impact they make.
Well, one of the things about translation is, for music, is, you know, the music of any country is reflective of the language. Sorry, the music of any country is reflective of the language. And, you know, the reason for German music sounding the way it does is because the German language sounds the way it does. I think translation is, at the least, a very hazardous thing indeed, particularly when it comes to setting it to music.
Are you against the rendering into English of Italian and German?
Well, I don't know enough foreign language, so the only times I can enjoy opera is when I don't understand what they're singing.
I have a Mark Twain, which I must unleash. When you mentioned German, Mark Twain wrote a sentence which was marvelous. He says, whenever the literary German starts to speak, he dives in, you lose sight of him, he dives into the Atlantic, and at the other side, with the verb in his mouth, emerges. Which, you know, the German with the verb at the end of the... Talk about the impact of words. I mean, we're talking about this in a kind of cool, scholarly way, and it's interesting, but really the point about words is that a single word like nigger, kike, Jew, limey, wop, can have a tremendous impact and cause tremendous offense. Should we ban some of these words?
It's not a question. First of all, it's not a question of banning them. I just don't think they should be used unless there is no other way, possibly, if the President of the United States gets up on television or something and uses one of these words, I don't think they should be banned. We should report them. But
you wouldn't report those words.
We once reported an obscenity in the New York Times. The only time I'm conscious of, we don't use them for a lot of reasons. One is the trademark. As soon as we start using them, we're just like everybody else. But once we did, that was during one of the Nixon tapes, where the expletive was not eliminated. And, of course, all the reporters were sitting around waiting to see if we would use this word, eagerly watching if I would crumble. But since it was in the text, we made I made a decision to use it. I wasn't going to censor the President. And the word was shit. What? It was shit. At times the word was shit. I'm sorry. And, but I got something out of it because I was ready with an answer when magazines would call and say, how come the Times did this? It's the first time. And I had my answer ready. The New York Times will take shit from the President of the United States, but not from anybody else. I kept repeating that until finally somebody printed it. But I wanted to say that quickly, my professional interest and my personal interest is much more, not so much in the use of words, the abuse of words, abuse by words, not of words, but not so much in the ones of racial epithets and the things that people normally avoid, but the things that seem quite innocent but are not, and result in a total distortion of either the person's character or the situation he or she is. I'll give you a couple of examples. And as the editor of the Times for all these years, this was one of my things I watched as carefully as we could.
The King Charles's head is the phrase you're struggling for.
All right. Now let me tell you, the police found a shortage in the accounts of X company, but the chief accountant, Mr. So-and-so, claimed he knew nothing about it. The man is dead on the spot.
Yeah, he's dead.
There are others.
Claimed implies guilt.
Right. Or, absolutely, but it's used all the time. There are others that the punctuation can be deadly. Just plain punctuation. I always watched out, and I think the Times still does, for what I used to call the cowardly commas. If you see somebody's name with a comma after it, watch out. Example, and there's a comma, phrase, or clause, another comma. I'll make one up. Claudia Clancy, comma, daughter of the publisher who was earned Putnam, I guess it's Putnam, $50 million, comma,
yeah,
today received an unusually large advance for her as yet unfinished first novel.
Yeah.
Period.
Yes.
Now, every word in that is true, but it's all a lie. The commas make it a lie.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So this is the abuse of words, the use of, and sometimes it can lead to terrible tragedy. And I'm saying all this because I believe that my friend, or our friend, Jerzy Kosinski, was hastened toward his death by being denounced as a plagiarist. I saw him, we all saw him, not crumble because he kept his, but we saw him to devote the rest of his life to trying to prove he was not a plagiarist, and it ate away at his spirits. It ate away at his creative energies. And he would say, Abe, when I go out to Minneapolis to make a speech, I'm no longer Jerzy Kosinski, who has written 10 novels. I am that fellow. Isn't he a plagiarist? And that's what he was fighting for the rest of his life.
It's temptation to put an adjective in front of everybody's noun. Bill?
Well, since we did mention the protocols of the New York Times, I had a letter published in the Times day before yesterday, and in the original, I quoted a particular paragraph, and then I said, that's a hell of a paragraph, and then went on to analyze it. So they said, could they put heck instead of hell? I said, no, put in inferno, which they did.
I would like to.
But Stephen's going to ask a question.
I want to ask a question because
I'm
a lot
to
of publishers here and newspapers. Why are so-called obscenities not used? They're used in some publications, some very popular publications. And why is there such a ban on them in, let's say, a newspaper? What is the reason for that?
Well,
that you would lose so many readers if you published a four-letter word?
Have you tried to smuggle an obscenity into the Atlantic or somewhere?
Oh, I've tried to submit obscenities in almost any publication you can name. Times once changed jockstrap to glove.
Not in Mr. Rosenthal's rugged time.
It's true. Jim Boughton said, I forgot who he was talking about, somebody who was invited to the Yankee Old-Timers game, and he wasn't. He said, I don't know who it was. Phil Linz or something. He said, Phil Linz couldn't carry my jockstrap, and came out in the Times. They called me and asked me about it. I'll tell you that. I said, well.
Was this in Rosenthal's time? You see, I tell you, you had a Chinese army of words. That one got away. That was a deserve. Jesse, what's your attitude to that? When you come to compile a dictionary, as the man who wrote the F word, do you believe that, since you put the word into circulation, do you believe that Steve's right, that there's a kind of petty Puritanism prevailing? How's that for alliteration?
Well, there are a few different things to consider. As far as dictionaries go, dictionaries don't recommend words or anything like that. Dictionaries record the words that are used in the language.
You're a kind of pusher, though, really.
Sorry?
You're a kind of pusher. I mean, you put them into circulation.
Well, no, because the F word, for instance, has been around for about 500 years, but it's only been in the last 30 that it's made it into dictionaries. So you can't say that dictionaries are the cause of people using the F word or anything like that. And words like that are very common, and there's a reason that they need to be in the dictionaries, because they are common. And at the very least, if they are words that are offensive or vulgar, you have a responsibility to put them in just so you can note that these are vulgar or offensive.
Do you go around looking for things like this? I mean, are you going around looking for things like this all the time?
Actively.
Actively. Anybody want to say anything really rude this morning? Please say it to my guest, Jesse, privately.
When I was working at the Atlanta Journal, an old reporter there said he covered World War II, and he was on a battleship that was strafed by Japanese airplanes, and there was an American sailor standing on the deck, shaking his fist at the planes going over and saying, "You fucking Japs!" And he knew the paper wouldn't print that.
Can we retake that?
Yes, huh? Can we take?
Continue.
Okay, we're going to edit this tape, I think. But the oh, I'm sorry.
No,
well, anyway. But at any rate, the reporter knew they wouldn't print that, so he changed it to "You damn Japs." and then the copy desk changed it to "you darn Japs." So
Oh,
now, of
God.
course, it has to be "you darn Nipponese." Or
Oh,
something.
gosh and golly, and gee whiz.
I'd like to know from Mr. Rosenthal, what is the philosophy behind that? So-called family newspaper. What kind of family doesn't know those
What's
words?
that?
What kind of family doesn't know those words? Family newspaper.
I would agree with you that it's Puritanism, but I wouldn't say that's petty. Puritanism itself is not necessarily an evil thing if it's something you wish to do or adopt because you do not wish to do something and is not forced upon you. The reason, this is our times, ours, the people who run it and the people who write for it and so on. We have a feeling about it and our readers. A paper is doesn't exist by itself. It's a catalytic reaction among the staff, its publisher, its purpose, its audience, and we have felt for, and we still do. I'm not so sure. I get all worked up about heck or darn or something. In fact, I wouldn't. And I certainly, it's hypocritical only in the sense that I use these words in my life rather too much. But my life is not necessarily the life of the paper with which we have been entrusted, which is not a dirty word either. And we have a personality. The personality of that paper has moved over time.
Just stop it. Could somebody stop the guys above getting their 2 pence in?
That's
Okay,
somebody
2
from
cents
the
worth, rather.
Washington Post.
Right.
Go
on.
The personality of the paper has moved on very important things. The kind of news we cover.
Okay.
There are no taboos anymore. But on the question of obscenities, there was a feeling among all of us, I think, which may change with another generation, but right now it hasn't, that the use of obscenities would signify a change in our vision of the paper, and our love and respect for it, and for the readers that we don't want to convey.
Let me ask you. Yeah, well, never mind letter writer. Let me ask you.
Report somebody having said something.
Here's something. When you're in a case where there's a riot in the street, and the cop has said something, or somebody else has said something which is really provocative, and you don't report the language because it's obscene. You can't say he made an obscene remark. And what he says, I'm going to do.
Well, if street language or even the language of cops were our criterion, we would have the paper full of it. And if you're writing fiction, you can control it. But if you decide that you are going to report totally the language of the streets, then the paper would, of necessity, have to be full of it. We prefer it not.
Fascinating. But how
a matter
can
of
you
preference.
I know. Okay, well, the audience can come in on this, but how can you actually do justice to the context in which the crime took place, in which the riot took place, unless you know the words which somebody said? I mean, I have shared the same problem with you as a newspaper editor.
I think that over a period of time, the New York Times and other newspapers have done a pretty fair job of alerting the readers to the crimes in the street and the horrors of the street and to poverty and so on, far more than any other institution in American life.
Here's a guy who's in an angry situation.
Okay.
He says what the hell he likes, and you're going to come and clean up his language. He sounds really good.
Yes, because in everything there is a trade-off in this. And we think we prefer the kind of paper that trades off obscenities.
Let me come with Sapphire first.
Well,
you want to follow on immediately? Go on. After David's never through. Come on.
No, I want to say this: on obscenity, shocks or does not shock exclusively as a question of the context in which it is used. When Norman Mailer's first book was published, the Pacific book, what was it called?
Naked and the Dead.
The F word was F-U-G-G. All the way through. And John Roach, in a review in the New Leader, pointed out that the F word we're talking about is used so habitually in barracks talk as to be invisible.
Yeah.
But the minute you spell it F-U-G-G, every time you see it, it hits you. And therefore it distorts the reality that the author attempted.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can't expect a word that is used as habitually as that word is to appear in the New York Times without giving it a prominence that affects the integrity of the original usage.
Are you convinced, Stephen?
Well, no. First of all, there's a lot more reporting than just street riots. I mean, again, what about letter writers who use a word for the flavor of it? That when they say hell, they mean hell. They do not mean heck. It has a different tone,
right.
And then it is, if not censored, I don't want to.
Heck isn't used by anybody since Ronald Reagan.
Well, except in the New York Times.
Look, Sapphire, your book is full of wonderful street language.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any problems wrestling with your conscience about it? Or?
Well, I was trying to accurately report in a way what I'd heard young people use. So I felt very comfortable using the language, and I felt that readers would have a choice of, picking up the book and opening it and deciding whether or not they wanted to buy it in a way that they might not have with the headlines of a newspaper or something. So I didn't have any qualms about the language.
Your book wouldn't have been your book without all that language.
No, I wouldn't have allowed it to be published without the language that I used.
Did you have any problem with your publishers? Speak freely now.
Not with the actual usage of the language.
3 knots sounds like a yes to me.
I think some of the content was more problematic than the actual use of the F word and the P word and the D word and the S word, that type of thing.
Anybody wants a dictionary to those, see this man. Okay.
So,
Bill, you satisfied?
Was that a question?
Yeah. No, it was a question. I wondered if you wanted to come back on that, because you were saying that you wouldn't apply it to the novel, would you? The sensitivity of yours.
Well,
you did with
the novelist is attempting 2 things. One, he wants to transcribe reality, i.e. to suggest to the reader how, in fact, these soldiers talk to each other, or these street people, or whatever. Right. But he also has to invest it with enough artistry to make it other than so conventional as to be boring. Mm-hmm. And it's the combination of those talents, isn't it, that...
Yes, the first time a 4-letter word was used on the stage, in commercial stage anyway, was as recently as the mid-'50s. It was in Cat in a Hot Tin Roof. Oh. And it was when Burl Ives said bullshit. And it was shot heard around the world. Nobody had ever said a 4-letter word stronger than damn on the stage before that. And now, of course, there's nothing but.
You can find out what that means in your dictionary, right?
Yes. Now, just let's shock, and let's come back to Sapphire, and to others too, for that matter. A phony new word has entered the language. When Americans, if I may say so, as somebody from other shores, have a tendency to invent these phony words. Ebony plus phonics equals ebonics.
Well, yeah. I think that is a kind of a phony word for Black English or dialect, and I don't. I haven't. It seemed to just erupted on the scene the past couple of months. So I really haven't had a chance to read a lot about Ebonics or Eubionics. So what I can talk about is Black English, yes, or English as it's used by people in the inner city.
Your book struck me as more dialect than the invention of a new language. Your book is in English.
Exactly. So in the book, the main character speaks in the language. I write in the language that the character speaks in. I'm not trying to create a new language. I'm trying to bring to mainstream America a language that is already being used. So it's not a new language. It's an old language evolved from the South, from up north. Now influenced by rap and video and television in the way that older Black English was influenced by, church and certain kinds of oral traditions. So
I found it completely comprehensible.
Yeah, it's totally understandable if you. It's just. Yeah.
Maybe when it's spoken, it's harder to understand. But when you write it down, like father and laugh, and all the words you have, it's very vivid.
But her style of writing is something you want to read aloud. It is so dialogic.
Yeah,
you
you're
know,
right.
what you were just reading, the little excerpt you read. It screams to be heard.
It does.
But let's talk about the word ebonics. I don't know if anybody feels that's a graceful word. I just think it's one of the most graceless words I've ever come across.
By the way, it's not a new word at all.
Oh, really?
In the early 1970s.
Here we go. Go on.
By whom?
Good.
By whom?
Tell us more. Tell us more.
Yeah.
To mean what?
Same thing, Black English vernacular.
And it's a combination of ebony and phonics, right?
Yeah.
And do you know who's responsible for this?
I can't remember his name, but a linguist coined it around then, you know, for this.
Bill?
Governor Wallace.
Governor Wallace. Very possibly.
I think that too much attention can be focused, though, on the word ebonics. And there is a point, I think, to the whole ebonics argument, which is that what's called Black English deserves respect and has internal rules, and it is a way of a form of speech unto itself, and it would surely behoove teachers of people who speak. Anybody who's trying to teach somebody who speaks that language should understand that language themselves.
I agree with that. I think that any teacher is going to be, you know, the real, you know, is going to have problems if they can't speak the language that the students speak. So if your kids are coming in time, I be coming, and you don't understand what they're saying, you're not going to be able to communicate with them. While your job may be to open the doors to them to the language of power. So for me as a teacher, no matter what language my students speak, whether it's Black English or Spanish or Russian, I want them to, the language of power in the United States is standard English, and that's what we need to
The
have.
language of power, very important sentence, very important. That.
But I can't give that language to them if I can't communicate with them. So it was very important to me teaching in Harlem to be able to speak the language that the students in Harlem spoke, which was different than the language I spoke in Texas. It was different than the Black English I spoke in Los Angeles and San Francisco. So Harlem had a new language. We said mama, they said mother. You know, I had to learn that. And I was going to be at Well, it was about me understanding them. So I needed to know when they said mother, they were talking about their female parent. So it wasn't so much that they were having problems understanding me. I needed to understand their language so we could hurry up and get on with the business of getting the skills they needed to survive.
That's one of the things that's so annoying about this umbrella term, ebonics, because there are as many varieties of Black English as there are of regional White English or Spanish or anything else. I'd like to know, how do you open your students up to new words? How do you, is it through reading assignments, or do you pick words
I think
for them?
the thing that people forget is unless people are just handcuffed, most students are already open. You know, they come wanting to learn new words. They come wanting to understand the world in some ways that they feel locked out of. So I didn't have a big problem trying to introduce different kinds of literature, different kinds of words. There were certainly sometimes if people don't have the ability to read well and to understand the printed word, then you have problems. But the students' minds are not closed. The students are trying to get out of the hell they're in.
Well,
they want information.
Sapphire, when they write for you, do you encourage them to write as you wrote and rendered their speech in print, or do you change F-A-V-V-E-R into F-A-T-H-E-R?
As soon as I can, without, you know, as soon as I can sense that I can impart some information without damaging people or hurting them, I let them know that we speak a different language than is spoken downtown. That there are two ways of talking. That we say, you know, father or mama, and that the other way of saying it, not necessarily the correct way, the other way of saying it is father. Yeah. And that what I want them to have is the same choice I have. So when I was talking to my mother, I didn't say hello mother, I said what's happening mama, you know what I mean? But I had a choice. Right. I could use both languages. So what I would want for my students is to be able to switch back and forth, to have the Black English that is so beautiful and that is so creative and that is our language, and also to be able to use the language of standard English.
The language.
How do you relate it to the spelling? If they do, when they do you ask them to spell what they hear? Do you ask them to spell it phonetically?
Well, I think it depends on when you enter into a student's life. I think that spelling by phonics is okay if you're dealing with someone who's learning to read late in life, but why not just start from the beginning to in kindergarten and first grade with teaching standard English, and also teaching how you can also spell phonetically. You know, okay, do you want to spell "my mother is coming" or do you want to say "my mama be coming"? We can write that either way, and we can learn to read Zora Neale Hurston, we can read Langston Hughes, we can see how to reproduce the language that we speak on paper authentically, and we can also see how to write the letter to the publisher in standard English so we can get our authentic language published. You know.
How do you react to this? Because as one of the custodians here.
Well, it seems to me that the sovereign responsibility of a dictionary is to attempt to maintain standards. There is no law save usage. If the whole world decides to use a particular word in a particular way, that's the meaning it will acquire, but not in today's dictionary, in tomorrow's. And Dwight MacDonald's wonderful essay in the New Yorker on Webster 3, he made that point, and I did it in the introduction I did to American Heritage Dictionary, that there should be a wall of resistance to innovations that are not really thought through and don't earn their way into common diction. So I don't think that one should be completely plebiscitary about standards. Day after tomorrow, they have to have time in waiting.
Yeah.
Now Webster did that. They would say, what is the word they used? Unauthorized or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But they lifted that in 1953, judging themselves to be without any responsibility for usage.
Yeah, but you're continually going around rescuing obscure words from obscurity, and you ought therefore to welcome this infusion of different dialects, different spellings, different.
Well, the 50,000 new words, as I remember in the last Oxford. I have no objection to that. But I think that every time one wants to throw away a word, like say anfractuous, they are throwing away a word which once there was such felt need for that it came into existence. Now, when Monsignor Knox wrote the introduction to the Bible, and had spent a lot of time, retranslated the Bible, and spent so much time on the King James, he said that the King James scholars had subsumed 13 different words into the single word righteous, and in doing so had set back ethical philosophical explorations by 2,000 years. Now, these gradations exist because somebody feels a need to express the gradation. If you simply say, well, pull them all together into a single word, you sacrifice all of that intellectual labor.
How do you cope when you come to the dictionary? John Updike, in his essay on Fowler's new book, was complaining, it's the only complaint he had as far as I could see about usage, was that I couldn't care less is now being rendered as I could care less, which means the exact opposite, and yet it's used to mean something quite different from what the words say. How do you cope with that?
First of all, with that expression, it's not I could care less. It's I could care less. I mean, it's sarcastic. Yes.
It's emphasis on the could. Let's try it then. Okay, I couldn't care less about your dictionary. Okay, you.
I could care less. I mean, it's a sarcastic expression.
So it depends on a Sondheim inflection, right? So it's no longer, it's passed out of written, it's now a sound word.
It is, and this is a very sort of informal expression. It's not one, this is one that sarcasm perfectly explains, and it's been around for quite a while, and at the very least, the dictionaries that do include these expressions have usage notes about that, and it's certainly a relevant thing to say these words should mean, if you take them literally, I couldn't care less is the proper expression, but I could care less is so common that dictionaries have a responsibility to include it.
That's very
and it's the
difficult
same with usage books.
I could care less.
No, it's not. It's a question of emphasis. It's the sound of the word. I could care less. Oh, God, somebody could care more. Come on.
That's emphatic.
Isn't it's the sound? Am I not right, Stephen? It's it's not a contraction. It's
The way he
sound.
said, I could care less.
I could care less. You know.
No, it's not on the could. That's the whole point. It's not on the could.
I think dictionaries should retain some element of prescription in them. I like the Random House Dictionary because it has these little usage notes, which I was arguing with two highly literate people the other night about whether you could use bi-monthly to mean twice a month. And I said, that's wrong. You can't say that. And they were saying, you can't say that. And I said, why can't I say it's wrong? They said, you can't say it's wrong, because then they looked up at Random House Dictionary, and the second definition of bi-monthly was semi-monthly. And so there you have a descriptive dictionary telling me I can't say it's wrong. I mean, that seems to me just as prescriptive as anything else. I think that some things, like, I mean, whereas, you know, if you had a little note saying people often use semi-monthly to mean or bi-monthly to mean semi-monthly, but I mean, there's a clear rule there. There's not just a matter of, I mean, there's a reason to hold on to those words.
But the language is, words are continually being misused. What's your favorite? Disinterested is my favorite, when the people mean impartial, but they're using it for being bored, you know? Have you got?
I'll tell you a word that's being frequently used. I happen to have an example.
Oh, good.
Absolutely. It seems to me as things get more and more relative, people toss the word absolutely around a lot. And the other day, there was an aide to Representative Gingrich was asked this question in the testimony before the House Ethics Committee. Did Mr. Gingrich ever ask you to provide us any information that was less than complete or that was misleading? And the aide's answer was, absolutely not. Although I have to hesitate to use the word absolutely, which I think
in your native land, the absolutely of Britain is the word brilliant. I'll see you for lunch on Thursday. Brilliant.
That's right. That's right.
Are you coming to visit? Brilliant. Yeah.
I know. Well, I've had trouble ever since I came to the United States with the word quite. In England, it means kind of lukewarm. And I say, how did you like my book here? And they say, quite. Well, that's in the term of enthusiasm in the United States and the term of depreciation in England. In fact, of course, America has given us some of the best words in the English language. I mean, can you think of English words which would compare?
I think England has given us some of the best words in the American language.
Well, no. Can I just tell you this? We haven't given it to you, we've lent it to you.
I've got a problem with the literally.
No,
Yes.
I call you literally 15 times. Means you didn't call 15 times.
No, metaphorically, Mum. Not even metaphorically. No.
Literally used the opposite to what it means.
Exactly. Yeah.
But flaunt and flout, decimate, protagonist is a good one. People use
Well,
protagonist.
you know you're wrong on that.
Am I? I'm not wrong. How can I be wrong?
They can
Just
be
support me here a
They
minute.
can be two protagonists.
Pardon?
They can be two protagonists.
Two leading characters.
Yeah.
But they're not antagonists necessarily.
Romeo and Juliet were protagonists.
Both of them, yes.
Theoretically, you can only have one, but in fact, that's not true.
Yes, but it's not. Doesn't mean an antagonist.
Who said it did?
Well, a lot of people say,
Whose theory is this?
and that's the trouble with
The Greek tragedy.
The modern people instruct you that indeed you can, that you should jettison the superstition that you can't.
Yes,
So
you see, this is the trouble.
was around
And
there.
you
got more than two protagonists in the other.
No, I was just thinking what teachers they are.
And then the dictionary perhaps should be a little more prescriptive than it is, because otherwise words are changing their meaning. We lose enfeebling the language.
Many of these examples aren't necessarily examples of words changing their meaning. In many cases, words have had several different meanings. For instance, with disinterested and uninterested, originally there was not a sense that uninterested meant, I mean, the traditional usage distinction here is that uninterested means not interested, and disinterested means impartial. So a disinterested observer is someone without any bias, but he's not necessarily uninterested. But originally these words did not have this distinction. You know, this was introduced later into the language, and then it became 19th century, I think.
19th century?
If not later, I don't know. But after that, it was taken as gospel that these words were not interchangeable. They had separate meanings, and they shouldn't be confused. But with almost any example of words that have undergone some kind of usage debate, you can either find many examples of the so-called wrong usage in any great author you want, or the meanings that are supposed to be connected to these words are not historically true or not etymologically true. And while it's true that there are various words that are misused, how you define misused is a very difficult thing because words have been used in many different ways over the years, and the fact that some of them have meanings that we establish as true, that just changes a lot.
It may be difficult, but it's worth the effort.
That's the point. It's worth the effort, isn't it?
If words take too many meanings, they can't be used anymore. They become useless.
And also
if
they become
mean two different things.
they become litigious almost, in the sense they're going to cause a lot of trouble somewhere.
And you have heuristic battles after that.
Heuristic battles.
Word I detest, new word I detest most, or almost most, and proactive, and you're...
Proactive's been in the dictionary for a number of years.
Good God.
He was
glad
ahead.
I didn't know that. What does it mean?
Anticipatory, being done in advance of something, a proactive response.
Well, why didn't they say anticipatory?
What is co-equal?
That's a good one.
I tell you what,
Let's buy it.
let's spend 5 minutes on that, because it takes me into gender. How is the panel divided on, man's inhumanity to man, a person's inhumanity to person, mankind, womankind, chairperson? How do you stand on that? Gender.
How I feel is that it's worth the effort. I guess what bothers me what bothers me a lot is when I open a book and then there'll be a disclaimer. The author will say, I really, know we're fighting to eradicate sexism, and part of that fight is the elimination of sexist language, but it's just so difficult to write him and her, so I will be using him throughout this book, but when you see him, I mean her. And I think that's just a cop out and lazy and just
so you prefer
again returning power to where it always was instead of a redistribution. I don't know. I don't know if that's true. I think in the beginning, all language changes are difficult. I remember in the 60s hearing President Johnson struggle with the word Negro, and he would often say Nigra and things like that. And by the end of his term, he was able to properly pronounce the word Negro, and that is good. You know what I mean? That meant that. He was raised in a certain way, and he decided to change his language based on that it was no longer appropriate to talk that way.
I think faces this problem that Mr. Sondheim raised. Yesterday I wrote a letter on behalf of somebody who wanted an apartment. Dear sirs is what I would put for the first 60 years of my life. But now I had to struggle. Dear what? Sirs and madams? Sirs and ladies?
Well, I think that's what it's about. It is about struggle. It is about struggle.
It's about struggle. Anyway,
it is about changing patterns. It is about doing what's uncomfortable for a while.
Yeah, because you said language is a language of power. It's power, power, power. Words of power.
Dear members of the board, it's clumsy. It's clumsy.
Yeah, well, I think you might have solved that by saying dear members of the board, and you wouldn't have to worry about them.
That's clumsy. Dear members of the board.
Well, what?
Well, all right, so are you saying that using a sexist language because it's comfortable, you're going to continue to use sexist language because it's comfortable? Because it's not clumsy? Because it's graceful? At some point in this transition, there has to be clumsiness, there has to be awkwardness, there has to be there has to be some risk, and maybe that risk is your language won't be as beautiful and as
man, woman was born free, and everywhere they are in chains.
No, she wouldn't.
Is that okay by you?
It's better. It's better.
Okay, that's better. Now, does it sound better to you?
No.
Listen, we have an example that's existed now for 25 years, which is MS. And I'm still getting used to it because it still looks like they left some letters out to me. And I agree with Sapphire. It's absolutely correct that it should have come into the language, and I don't like it.
Okay. Yeah. Can I say something about that?
Yeah, you can say something.
We were very much involved, put it mildly, in the Ms. business, and I bear some of the scars. We did not use Ms. in print for a long time by a deliberate decision. When I spoke to people, I wrote to them, I say, dear, call them whatever they wanted to be called. The problem was that the move to for Ms., the reality was at the time before it came into common use, highly political, which is not a dirty word, but is political. We felt that, and that's also in the answer to your question, is why can't we use obscenities, let's say, in a letter. The Times depends upon its readers, but its readers cannot, we feel, should not really dictate to the Times its own usage. In the case of Ms., we had a problem. The problem was that a lot of people wanted to be called different things. This is no joke. We use the honorifics, Mr. A lot of people did not want to be called Mr. We called convicts, all convicts. That was my decision, no matter what they're arrested for. We used to take away the honorific for them. Now, they're all honorifics, because they're called out even in court after they're convicted. I thought it was ridiculous not to call them. There are a lot of people who don't like that. There are people who didn't want to be called Mr., they didn't want criminals to be called Mr., and they didn't want, they wanted, a lot of people did not want to be called brother or citizen.
Okay.
And so when Ms. came along, we were making a decision that this is no longer a political or pressure thing, but has become part of the language.
And so you put it in then?
And we did. And I realized later, merely by looking around at the faces of the women on the Times staff, and the fact that Gloria Steinem came to the office bearing flowers, that I had waited too long.
You waited too long.
At least a year too long. But we had to make that decision ourselves.
Yeah, I never had any problem with Ms. because I grew up saying Ms. to but I mean, I think that's a real problem, the he, she thing. And but I would be highly irritated if I grew up and every time, when I was growing up, every time somebody referred to people of either sex, it was she. I mean, I think it's an organic problem in the language, and everybody ought to try to root it out and do something about it.
What we need is a new word which covers both, possibly.
I know, yeah, shim or him or something.
God forbid.
That's called an epicene pronoun, and the search for this has been going on for a very long time.
Has anybody got an idea for an epicene pronoun?
No, seriously. In the 19th century, there were a number of people who tried coining them, like tem and ter, were ones seriously proposed for this problem. This is not a new problem.
You can see it's music to Buckley's ears.
I wonder why female doctors DRS.
It sounds plural, doesn't it?
Doesn't it?
It's misleading.
Right,
One
but
possibility that suggested is that women use she and men use he. I mean, women writers just say she.
That's a courtesy. That's a courtesy. How would you like that? Male writers would say she, and female
vice
writers
versa.
would say
Well, that
he.
might be nice.
You know what I mean?
Well, it's an idea. It's not. We need ideas, and people willing to work. I think it's,
Listen, it's a fantastic audience here this morning. We're ready to take any questions, including obscene questions. Yes, ma'am.
I was very curious. I'd like to ask Abe Rosenthal, what happens at the time when the reviewer goes to review a Mammoth play?
What happens at the times when a reviewer goes to review a David
Mamet play?
Yeah.
Do they say?
Yes.
How do they refer to
Yes.
the language?
Florida bullshit. Yes, come on. Florida bullshit. How'd you deal with it?
You mean the dialogue in the
Yeah, the dialogue
Well,
in a
the
David.
dialogue is, I would say, 60%
Obscenity.
scatology. And how
Scatology.
do they deal with the play
It's very
without
funny.
putting the play down?
Well, we normally, in most plays, not just in Mamet's plays, we don't normally give stretches of dialogue, so it's really not a problem that has ever occurred to anybody before I heard it today, whether we have to quote the obscenities in a play.
Another question over there, was it? Another question?
We don't in other situations.
Yes, this young fellow here. Thank you.
Has anybody on your panel ever created a word and planted it successfully into the American vocabulary? Creating a word.
I bet you have.
I tried to get Bill Sapphire, the other Sapphire, to do it, and he said, I would love to try, but they wouldn't print it in the Times.
Oh, well,
I wish to say that as the person who, my great claim to fame is I invented Bill Sapphire's column one day, and I would like to say that I know Bill Sapphire, admire him enormously, and he is giving you a story.
Right, he's giving you a story. Have you done a word?
Let him try it sometime, but let's find out.
Anybody invented a word?
I once used the noun form of the word bodacious, which is...
Just go slowly on this. The noun form
the bodacious is an adjective, and I used the noun form that I've never seen anybody else use, which is bodacity. He had the absolute bodacity.
What does it mean?
Well, bodacious means sort of bold and audacious and,
so he
daring
had the
and big and living large sort of thing.
Sounded.
I think I used one today. I'm not coming to think of it. I said I voted with grump. Now, as far as I know, is that a noun? Or is that a...
You must have a storehouse of these.
No,
grump's going in the dictionary, okay.
Nobody stopped me.
I've never created a word, but it's always been a fantasy of mine to take out gullible from the dictionary, just so I can really say, no, gullible isn't in the dictionary, and have people look, and it's not there.
Yeah, gullible. Anybody over here? And it's over in the opposition corners over there. Could you take the microphone to that young fellow? Over there.
Thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
How do you explain the acceptance of so much Yiddish expression in the American language, such as schmuck and so on?
Yeah. Hey, they've accepted a lot of English words like yes man, rubbernecker, gate crasher. Go on. American words. Sure.
They sound great. They sound like what they mean, and
Does any of you speak Yiddish?
I do.
Oh,
I speak broken Yiddish.
Broken Yiddish.
Broken English, broken Yiddish, broken everything.
Why are there so many Yiddish words? Because they're so expressive?
Well, there were a lot of Jews to start with, came to the country. They had a lot of children, and they fanned out all over the
But
country.
there was
And
Jewish
why is sauerkraut accepted, which is not? Why is pate accepted? Yeah.
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 But don't the Yiddish words do sound, I mean, yeah, but they sound like what they ought to sound like.
Yeah.
That's what's your point, you know, schmaltzy and so on.
What else can you call a schmuck but a schmuck?
What can you call a schmuck? He's a schmuck.
That's not what it means.
Yes, sir.
That's why you use it.
Oh, Mr. We have, this is Robert Fulgham in the audience. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you. What accounts for the use of you know? We say you know, this is, and I've heard the panel, at least 3 people this morning use this quite frequently in spoken speech.
It means
but not in written speech. You rarely see it. But it's very, it's very common to hear this, thrown in, among very intelligent people. And if you ask them frequently, they deny that they do it. That's even a more interesting phenomenon.
Anybody? Well, verbalize.
Almost all sentences begin with well in any exchange.
Well,
it's just a sort of introduction.
Some people speak without hesitation, without E-R-A-H-U-M. A lot of Britishers do, as a matter of fact. A friend of mine, the playwright Peter Schaffer, I've never heard him use either well, E-R-A-H-U-M. It's as if he edited the sentences before they come up, but they come out spontaneously.
Yeah.
I've rarely heard you, Bill, use E-R-A-H. I use it all the time. I still stumble, and it's a form of catching your breath. It's catching your breath.
Does it grate on you, Robert?
Yes, it really does.
So you
head shaking. It's like you're stumbling and sticking something in that's meaningless, but that has meaning.
You should have a kind of device to blank it out, otherwise it'd drive you crazy. You know.
What's the assumption here when you say you know?
That you don't know. Why are you talking to them unless if they know? If they don't know, okay? You really should say you don't know. Okay, try you don't know for a change. Okay. Did I have one more over here? Yes, I did. A lady at the back there. Could you take the microphone to her, please?
I'm just curious how many new words come into being annually, such as jetway.
Yeah. Going back to the 20s when I referred to rubbernecker, yes man, pin-up girl. The 20s seem to produce more words than we do today.
Well, actually, the number of words always goes up just because the number of technical and scientific words is always increasing. But this is something that's been studied a lot, and there are no good answers, but the numbers people will generally throw out are around 1,000 new words a year entering the language, of which a fairly high proportion are ones that you wouldn't encounter because they're too technical. But Random House, let's say, we add on the order of 200 words every year to the dictionaries.
Now, you see, going back to that young fellow's question, where do you get them from? Because etymology is really one of your arts, and some people say we shouldn't bother with etymology in dictionaries anymore, whether it comes from the Greek or from the Latin. What do you say? Did you find the origins of these new words? I mean, how truthful can you be to jet lag? Who invented jet lag?
Well, jetway, I think the question she was asking, is a trademark term. So that would go in with a trademark label, and you, as a matter of...
isn't.
No. I don't know who invented jet lag, and I don't know who invented most of these terms. It's very hard because...
Jet lag, one or two words?
It's a hyphen.
It's usually written solid now, I think.
Is it?
It's not a hyphen.
Not a hyphen.
It's either one or two, but
And one or two words. The voice of authorities.
No,
Right.
no. I'm Mr. Rosenthal
Okay.
will tell us.
But most words, it's very hard to know who coined them. It's very rare that you know this word was coined by someone. At best, you can say this was first used by someone.
Pin-up girl. Pin-up girl. You don't know?
I don't know who coined
Norman
it.
Mailer, I think. Anybody else over there? Yes, madam. Have you got a microphone?
Just speak loudly. We could.
You can. I think you better.
We could.
Right.
Two things on the she/he gender issue. I've recently seen a lot of people write S/HE, which certainly works in the written language, but not so well
Okay.
verbally.
Sounds like an author I know. She/he. Gail Sheehy. Excellent writer.
But I'd like to ask Jesse, I know there's a whole new language on computers now, people using. Will you be incorporating that into your dictionary, or will you be doing another dictionary dealing with this language?
Well, we have both, actually. We have an online dictionary called Cyberspeak, which is really good, and I recommend it. But we've also included a very large number of computer words into the regular dictionaries. In fact, more from internet than any other area of new words we've added in the last number of years. And most of the common terms now, all of the, ranging from the regular things, internet, World Wide Web, HTTP, these initials, to the slang like newbie, flame, and spam, these are all in there already. But just to go back to the gender issue, there's a tension here. It is on the one hand clumsy to use some of these things, and it is on the other hand exclusive to use male pronouns or male forms for these things, and that's just something the language is going to have to work out. I mean, there are a number of issues in language that have this kind of tension, like I was talking to you, Harry, before about the issue of spelling reform, where you have two very sensible goals. One is to make the language easier to learn, and the other is to preserve the way the language has been written for a long time, and these are both valuable goals, and there's no easy way of saying well, we have to use he, we have to use some neutral pronoun, we have to reform the language spelling. K-I-D-N-A-P-E-D.
Yeah, I want two P's. Yeah, well, kidnaped sounds too close to rape, and kidnapped.
That's right. I always used to look at the word M-O-L-E-S-T-E-R and think it was molester.
Listen, folks, we could go on for a long time here. It's been a fascinating morning. Just want to close with Jules Pfeiffer's. Thank you again. Jules Pfeiffer, I think, summed up this morning, about language. He said, in America there were once poor people, then they became needy, then disadvantaged, then underprivileged, and he felt at the end of the day that he still didn't have a dime, but he sure had acquired a fine vocabulary. And I hope you may feel that way this morning, that you've acquired a few extra words. Heuristically yours. Goodbye, and thank you, panel.
I think the core of the language are all the Anglo-Saxon roots, as opposed to the fancy words which are for decoration for icing, like anfractuous and heuristic and that sort of thing. Which I think that's spice, because you want dessert as well as.
Bill Buckley's dessert. Yeah, okay. Go on.
But it's I don't know if Bill uses heuristic in when he's talking.
When you do, Bill, when you're talking?
Oh, sure. I talk that way with my dogs.
My God.
That explains it.
Hey, I'm going to come back to language and sound. Let me stay for a second, if you don't mind, on this use of the word that nobody else has heard of and sends them scurrying to the dictionary. Do you think it's a kind of anti-democratic thing, or is he saving words that might disappear?
In this case, I don't worry too much about democracy, but I must say that although I am about the 14th or 15th most fervent admirer of Mr. Buckley in the American press. Sometimes goes up one notch, sometimes goes down four, but generally that's... when it comes to these lovely-looking, strange... When it comes to so-called difficult or long or unusual words, I feel something like a character played by Audrey Hepburn in one of her movies when Cary Grant or Peck or whoever it was went up to put the move on her, and she looked at him and said, I'm very sorry. I have so many friends now that I have no room for more until somebody dies. I now feel that I have a lot of, I know quite a lot.
And if you don't know what that means, you've come to the right breakfast. An Olympian leap in the alphabet takes us to Abe Rosenthal, columnist, foreign correspondent, Pulitzer Prize winner who ran the New York Times for more than 15 enlightened years. He was the daily drill sergeant of a Chinese army of words, and my, did he get them on parade on time. Sapphire, poet, performance poet and novelist who has taught reading and writing to teenagers and adults in Harlem for 8 years. Her novel, Push, is really poignant and funny. It's a stunning evocation of the voice of a black street girl of 16. I'll give you a kind of, I can't do the words, but let me just give people a flavor of the prose. Boys say I'm laughing ugly. He say Clarice is so ugly, she laughing ugly. His friends say, no, that fat bitch is crying ugly. Laugh, laugh. And it's an absolutely fantastically funny and moving book. And Jesse Scheidler, the gatekeeper, no word or usage gets into the Random House dictionary without a Scheidler good housekeeping stamp of approval. He is also, may I unmask him, this is the author of the book The F Word. He wouldn't think it. And finally, in the Sweeney Todd chair, the last chair here, is Stephen Sondheim, the celebrated Pulitzer Prize winner, lyricist and composer, Passion, Sunday in the Park with George, West Side Story, and many other brilliant achievements. So let me begin with the renegade, the lexicographical snob, the man who invites more rage for his use of the obscure.
Which I think is a welcome acknowledgement.
Can you not hear?
He justified using the word anfractuous partly on the basis of onomatopoeia, that it sounded more like ambiguous than ambiguous itself did. And I think that's a welcome acknowledgement of the role of the ear in language. I was struck by how oral President Clinton's speech was yesterday. There was nothing that really leapt out. I mean, there was one, a couple of lines in the poem, Miller Williams' poem, which I may not remember them quite right, but I do remember them. I think I do. Who has seen learning struggle from teacher to child cannot allow ignorance to spread like rot, which has a nice ring to it, I think. At least the word rot has a nice ring to it. And I think that more and more speakers today and writers neglect the ring and thump of words and just sort of get awfully abstract. That's certainly not true of the case of anybody sitting here, especially Sapphire, the novel I've been reading. But
well, most language is spoken rather than written, which brings me to Steve Sondheim. How do you respond to that? I mean, do you think the spoken word is more important than the written word?
It's not a question of importance. It's just it's fun. It's
hello.
Hello.
We're having trouble here with the microphones, Mr. Soundmaster. Okay.
How's this? Okay. No. I said the fun of the language, it seems to me, is the sound of it. And I know when I read, I hear a voice speaking the language. And it's very interesting what Roy says about words like rut.
Buckley, why should you want to rescue a survivor from some Greek linguistic shipwreck like heuristic? Defend yourself, Buckley.
Well, give
you a synonym for it, and
I'll give you a synonym
and I'll
for
start
it.
using it.
Okay, controversial.
That doesn't mean the same thing.
Nagging.
No, sorry.
Come on, you give me. Tell everybody what it means in your defense.
An heuristic legal defense is one that takes advantage of all the loopholes and is very long drawn out. So I don't know another word that quite does that. But if you want to, I received this letter from Ken Galbraith yesterday, and this might help you out a little bit. He says, I take it from your letter that I should close down on endorsements for a while. I had thought of giving you one for your recent book. It would have been, everybody knows that William Buckley is a master of words. It is only the use to which he puts them that restrains one's enthusiasm.
But defend it. Let's come. Get, you really rejoice in using words that nobody else understands.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No. That's like saying Thelonious Monk rejoiced in playing a 11th chord with a raised ninth. He just thought it was the right chord to play at that moment in the music. Mm-hmm. Oh, how am I doing?
Beethoven.
It's not really a chord.
Roy, what do you think of this undemocratic champion on your...
Well, I was reading in Mr. Buckley's book about his justification of using the word anfractuous.
Say that again.
Anfractuous instead of ambiguous, which, and on grounds partly of onomatopoeia.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I'm trying to get a word in edgeways here. Good morning. What a fantastic turnout, and no wonder in view of the panel. I want to apologize to the people here, Mr. Gill and others, that I have my back to you, Enid, this morning, because I have to face the C-SPAN camera on pain of death to introduce the guests. And instead of the usual anarchy which prevails when I introduce them, today we have alphabetical order as a kind of tribute to the subject of today, which is the word. And so I begin with Roy Blunt. You say it, Blunt. Where is he? Here he is. I've got to face this way, Roy. Sorry. Which plunges us all into the soup straight away. He's the Roy of all trades, linguistic expertise with the rest of the panel. He's a usage consultant of the American Heritage Dictionary, but is the only one who's rafted the Amazon and been attacked by a piranha fish, unless I'm surprised by my colleagues. William Buckley behind me, founder of the National Review, holder of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, has just published The Right Word, which we celebrate today. It's only his 37th book. He's the lexicographical snob. Where is he? And, yes, it's him. And wait for this, he's very heuristic. An adjective which we also use as a noun, and say that Buckley is an